Hey, it's Grady at Twin Creek Audio back in the studio today. I'm going to share another mix today. Today I'm going to be mixing the song Turning Points from my album 13 Channels that I put out back in 2017, which has been almost 4 years ago. This was originally mixed in the box using Reaper, and today I'm going to mix it with the Soundcraft Sapphyre recording console and all analog outboard gear except for the Yamaha Rev500, which technically is a digital reverberator. So we're going to mix the song here on the console. The way that I've been doing these more recently is I show a little bit of what I'm plugging in, and then I have the outputs of the console connected along with my voice mic so that I can solo different things, isolate different things, and show better examples of what's going into the mix. And then I'll print the final mix towards the end of the video. I've also been time stamping or listing timestamps in the video description, so you can jump to different parts of the video if you prefer to do it that way. Anyway, let's get started with this mix of Turning Points from my 13 Channels album and see what kind of mix I can pull off today with this. Let's take a look at the Patchbay for this mix. On the snare insert here, that's patched to the Symetrix 501 right here. Then on the bass guitar, channel 8, it's patched to the Urei LA-10 right here. I'm using 2 reverbs. From the AUX4 output, I'm going through this patch cable over to the NUX Atlantic delay and reverb pedal. And then the other AUX out, AUX3 here, is coming down to the input of the Yamaha Rev500, and then the stereo outs from that are going into stereo channel 3B on the console. I also have subgroups 1 and 2 inserts connected down here to the LA Audio 4x4. You can see these long cables here. That's the return from the NUX Atlantic, and that cable just runs over here and behind the rack, and they're connected here. So those are 2 1/4-inch TRS to TT cables. So I'm just connecting this directly to the Patchbay. Everything else is actually wired to the Patchbay, but not this pedal. Okay, here's the mix spread out on the console. The way I usually do things is I start with drums. So we've got kick, snare, we've got toms, just 2 toms in this song. So they're single tom to each track or each channel here. Then we've got stereo overheads. This was an XY stereo pair. And then we have, this is a stereo room mic far away from the drum kit, a pair of room mics, and then another closer room mic. And I've got those blended in the box and sent here in stereo. Then we have bass guitar. This is the main clean guitar, and then we've got a bunch of different guitar tracks, which you're going to see because I'm going to show those in detail and solo up some of these things. These 2 faders are a compression submix. This is basically the subgroups on this console. The way I have it set up is I have these 2 channels here have been turned into subgroups number 1 and 2, and I have the LA Audio 4x4 stereo compressor. I've got it stereo linked and set up for parallel compression on the drums. So anything that's being sent to subgroup 1 and 2 is going through these 2 channels. They're acting as subgroups, and those inserts of these subgroups are connected to that LA Audio 4x4, which is a FET compressor, and it's actually fairly clean for a FET compressor, but it actually can get kind of nasty if you push it. So it's a good one for the drum sub, I've found, for parallel compression. And then I've got a group of faders way over here. The way I've got my console set up is kind of strange, but these are lead vocal, 2 backing vocal tracks. Then we have the strings at the end of the song, and then some other guitar and fill type tracks here. So these are more like featured instruments and things that come in different sections, and then the main instrumentation of the song is down here. I've got parallel compression here going on the drums with kick, snare, toms, and part of the room mics being sent to the subgroup for parallel compression. So let's hear all the drums, and then while I'm playing that back, I'll take some of these different things in and out so you can hear the differences. Kind of the drum sound, which actually took a little bit of work to get there. I've got some EQ on the kick drum and the snare drum channels. I'm boosting some low mids and some 80 hertz, some of the low shelf EQ on the Sapphyre EQ. And I'm actually taking out a little high mids, which is not normally something that I would do on a kick drum, but in this case that's working for the kind of sound with the rest of the mix anyway. Now on the snare drum, I'm actually doing some boosting, but it's high mids, but it's lower frequency than usual. And again, with all of this EQ, you know, I know kind of where different instruments are. That's something I learned and I memorized back when I was in college, but it's still, you know, I use my ears to determine what actually each instrument needs, because, you know, different snare drums are unique and where the overtones or the attack or whatever is on the drum. So I've got some low mids being added to the toms and a little bit of the low shelving EQ more on the smaller tom and a little bit less on the larger tom. The overheads, I've got some 12 kilohertz shelf EQ being added to that, and I'm taking out some 80, boosting some 7K and taking out some low mids. Typical thing I'll do on overheads that I've recorded, because usually I'm not in great rooms. So I find that there's some frequency problems that I have to correct in the EQ of the overheads. And then we've got the room mics, and I've EQ'd those a little bit too. Basically, I'm boosting a little bit of lows here, and only on one side of the room I'm boosting some low mids, and I'm taking out some low or some high mids actually. And, you know, that looks like around 1K. I'm actually removing 3 dB of that. Bass guitar is EQ'd a little bit. I'm actually removing, or actually boosting a little bit of 700 hertz here. And then I'm boosting some low mids and a little tiny bit of 80 right there. Then on the clean guitar, which is the main guitar that plays all the way through the song, there is no EQ on the right-hand side of it. Well, actually, I'm pulling a little bit of 80 hertz out of that, but other than that, the EQ is not on. So the other side of it, not really doing anything, everything straight up and down. So the main clean guitar is not really being EQ'd. I don't often EQ or compress electric guitars, especially. Sometimes I'll EQ an acoustic guitar. Sometimes I'll do that to an electric guitar too, but in this case, I'm not really EQing very many of the guitar tracks in this mix. Next, let's hear some bass, and then we'll hear guitar. This is the bass. And that's what it sounds like going through the Urei LA-10 compressor, which I find to be exceptional on bass guitar. It's also exceptionally good on lead vocals. And that's the two things I end up using it for. In this mix, of course, I've used the RNC in super nice mode, and I'm using the LA-10 on that bass. It sounds nice and fat and sits in the mix really nicely so far. as I've been working on this mix. Let's listen to the main clean guitars now. Those guitars don't need any EQ. I don't have any EQ, no compression, no EQ. That's it, just those guitars. That was a Fender Rock Pro half stack, like a 100-watt 412 half stack that has a tube in the preamp, but it's otherwise a solid state amp, and that's what I used on this record, was the Rock Pro half stack, usually with an SM57 and a 421, and I'm thinking that's what this is. I don't remember exactly because it was 4 years ago. I'm thinking that was it, this 2-mic setup. And one is not as loud as the other, so I have this fader pushed up and they're panned slightly left and right. Gives it a nice sound. There's no reverb, no outboard reverb on that. Back to the drums for a second. I do have some reverb on the snare and the 2 toms. That's it. I don't have any reverb on the overheads or the kick. Just a little bit, and it's the Yamaha Rev500. I use the light plate preset with 1.4 seconds of decay time, and I think it sounds pretty good. That reverb sounds really good. Yamaha outboard reverb units, typically I really like the way they sound, and the Rev500 is no exception. It's a really nice sound, and of course, you know, I bump it up to exaggerate the effects for you and everything, but I'm really happy with the way that that's coming together. Towards the kind of bridge-like section, there's an acoustic guitar, and let me play you that, and then I'll show you what I'm doing to the acoustic guitar in this mix. So I'm sending that acoustic guitar out of auxiliary 4 on the console and into the NUX Atlantic delay and reverb pedal. And then I'm taking the mono return, even though the pedal is stereo, I don't have another TT to 1/4 inch patch. So it's a mono return, bringing that in over here. And I have the acoustic panned slightly to the right, and I have the NUX Atlantic return panned slightly to the left. And that's how I'm getting that really big, expansive acoustic sound. And in this mix, to me, it just sounds fantastic. Moving on to the heavy, overdriven guitars that come in. Let's hear those by themselves now, and then I'll explain what I'm doing to those. The truth is I'm not doing a lot to those electric guitars. The overdriven electric guitar, they're both panned straight up and down in the middle, and one of them is actually the sound that you hear mostly. The other is a DI track, and I actually have that DI track just underneath this track to provide a little bit of attack and just beef up this a little bit. Then I have them EQ'd slightly different up here. I have the DI track EQ'd to have a little bit of that attack, and then taking out some lows, and the amp track taking out a little bit of 80 and a little bit of funky low mids just to scoop the mid-range for that sound. But it's carrying most of the sound, but I do have just the dry DI signal in here. These are not going to any reverb or anything like that here on the console. although the amp did have reverb. It had a spring reverb built into it, and this again would have been the Fender Rock Pro 1000 head and matching 412 cabinet loaded with Eminence 12-inch guitar speakers. Towards the beginning of the song, we have an introductory guitar part that's kind of a melody line, and that sounds really cool. Let me cue that up and we'll play that. Okay, that introduction guitar part, that was done with a plug-in. The stereo pair is the plug-in. Then the unaffected DI signal is this fader way down here. And I do have this in the mix along with, I probably froze this because I think I did this with the Scuffum Amps plug-in. And so the reverb and the little bit of phase that you hear in that sound, that was just part of the plug-in. And it's just here. I'm not doing anything. There's no reverb. It's not being sent to anything here on the console other than a slight bit of EQ, taking out some lows out of the left side, adding a little high mids and highs, taking out some lows out of the right side of that. And then the DI track over here, I don't have any EQ on that, but I actually, that is the one thing I've got the DI sent to the Yamaha Rev500 reverb over here. So that's pretty cool. Now this is our stereo drum submix that's going through the LA Audio 4x4 for the parallel compression on the drum kit. So the rest of the stuff in this mix are these faders down here, which I really like having things kind of separated like this. This is actually working out pretty well. So let's move on because we've got several guitar things down here and we've got the wonderful string arrangement at the end with the guitar solo. So let's hear the strings first. That's the string section, and then it has a guitar solo that comes in on top of that. Well, actually I think the guitar comes in first and the strings come in and kind of follow the rest of the guitar solo. Let's listen to that section by itself. Really cool stuff. I really enjoyed that guitar solo and the strings underneath it. That's a really interesting thing. I'd never done anything like that before in any song that I've ever done, so it was really interesting for me. And I have the strings going to the Yamaha Rev500 a little bit, and then I have the guitar solo going to the NUX Atlantic delay and reverb, with the solo being panned slightly to the right, and of course the NUX Atlantic delay and reverb being panned slightly to the left from where I used it earlier in the mix on the acoustic guitar, with the acoustic panned slightly to the right and the NUX Atlantic delay and reverb panned slightly to the left. Slightly to the left. So now we have the lead guitar solo comes in with the strings coming in underneath it. The lead guitar solo there is panned slightly to the right, and of course the NUX Atlantic delay and reverb is still panned slightly to the left. So that makes for a nice big wide mix, that's what I want, because that's what I like, and I want to get what I like out of this mix. So now let's check out some vocal tracks. There is a lead vocal, an octave vocal, and then there's a harmony vocal. The harmony vocal only happens at one point in the song, And that would be right here.
Way out, the fear it's gone.
That's all three vocals together. Then here is just the vocal and the octave vocal.
Have unhappy endings, something's lost.
On the vocals, I'm not compressing that harmony vocal. It's not going through any outboard gear or anything. The only vocal that's getting any compression is the lead vocal, of course, going through the RNC, really nice compressor, because it does sound really nice on a vocal track. I am adding some effects to some of these vocals though. I have the harmony vocal going to the Rev500 along with the lead vocal. So you've got some of that nice plate reverb from the Rev500 on the vocal tracks there. And really that's what's going on the other ones too. I'm not sending anything except for the harmony vocal that happens just that split second. That's being sent to the NUX Atlantic delay and reverb pedal, and returning panned slightly to the left, which is why that vocal track is panned slightly to the right, and the other vocal track, the double, well, the octave vocal is panned slightly to the left, but it's being sent to the Yamaha Rev500 instead. So we're getting a crazy reverb spread, and I hope that that made sense to you, because it took me a little while to put that whole idea together and sit here and get my head around the different reverbs that I wanted to hear in this mix to make it have the width and the depth and the space that I wanted. Let's listen to a little bit more of it now. See, there's a last minute mixing decision. I did have a hi-hat mic and I had that blended in with the overhead mic, and I really wasn't hearing enough hi-hat just then, so I've moved the hi-hat up a little bit in the mix here kind of at the last minute when I've got everything sounding pretty good in the way that I want it. So there's always a few things you could change or improve. Even when I finish something and it gets released, I hear it later and there's always things that I could improve on. It's like any kind of art, mixing, music, anything like that. It's never really finished. Eventually you just give up and abandon it and leave it as is. So kind of done that with some of these things, and now I'm pulling them back out and trying to remix them and see if I can make them better. And you know, because it's interesting and hopefully informational or educational for people out there watching on YouTube, and it's really fun for me to make these videos. So I think I've got this about ready to do a final mix.
Staring right our dreams have unhappy endings. Something's lost. It's all out of place as I search for a new world where I can find a place that I belong. It's reaching way out. The fear, it's gone, and there's no way to know why, 'cause it's too late for that, and I've lost my whole world. It's coming round again, and there's no way to know why, 'cause it's too late for that. Spilling over, and it's gone. Spilling over, and it's gone. Spilling over, and it's gone. Spilling over.
One of the coolest features of this Soundcraft Sapphyre that I found when I'm mixing is these XFX buttons here on the channel faders, which are the small ones. Normally these come from the microphones and go to your tape machine or your interface, and then the big faders down here are your monitor returns. So it's already set up for tracking and mixing, and you can subgroup things when you're tracking. But these XFX buttons turn these into post-fader sends, which you can then assign to subgroups, like I've done in several of these mix videos. And you can see in this one, I'm sending kick snare, the toms, which are panned like this, but I'm sending them to the subgroups in stereo, so I have the toms stereo panned. Because they are panned out, these are in the center, kick and snare. And then this is the room mics here. So I'm sending all those to the number 1 and 2 subgroups, and then that has a compressor on the insert, and then I've turned this set of channels here into my subgroups with the sub button at the top of the channel. Up here are these kind of purplish buttons. So these have become my subgroups 1 and 2, and I've pushed these buttons to bring the faders for the subgroups down here for my mix. I've got my 1 and 2 subgroup with the compression on it. So all of the things that I send from these faders now go to that subgroup, that pair of subgroups, and they go through the compressor and come back on those big faders, so I can vary the level of the compressed signal and add it to the dry signal down here. And normally you can do that on most 8-bus boards by just assigning to both when you're mixing, but this one gives you additional control because I can actually vary the level independently of these big faders down here and send certain amounts. In this case, I've got a little bit less of the snare going to the compression submix, and I have a lot of the toms and the kick drum and the room mics, but they're all adjusted at different levels independently, so that makes it really cool for mixing. It's a great analog console if you want to mix out of the box on a big console and you have the space for one. I'd say the star of the video today, or this mix, was probably reverb, and in this case I was using the Yamaha Rev500, And then I was also using the NUX Atlantic delay and reverb pedal. I used some compressors too. I used this Urei LA-10 compressor on the bass guitar. What I'm showing right now on video are the exact settings that I used in the mix for today. So you can pause the video and take note of those exact settings. The 501 was used on the snare drum, and these are the exact settings. I did have the peak limiter on this time. And then the snare was actually being compressed twice because I had the drum submix going through this LA Audio 4x4, and it is stereo linked. And I do have the sidechain filter that's built into this. I have it engaged, but it's really only ignoring everything under 50 and everything over 4K, so it's still compressing most of the drum signal, which is kind of what I wanted for this. Those are the exact settings I was using to make the drum compression or parallel compression really beefy. Then of course the FMR Audio RNC compressor down here on the lead vocal. Those are the exact settings that I was using on the vocal today in the mix, with super nice mode switched on. It's good stuff. And here's the NUX Atlantic delay and reverb pedal that I was using on a couple things: the acoustic guitar, the guitar solo, and the octave vocal. And this is exactly how I had it set. It's set to 60 style delay, plate reverb. I have the repeat set pretty short, and the delay time I actually typed the tempo. The plate reverb, I have the decay set right there and the level set there. Both of those are on. Pretty nice sound in reverb and nice sound in delay too. I had quite a bit of fun mixing this song. I feel like the results that I got through the console with the outboard gear, even the reverb from the Rev500 and the NUX Atlantic reverb pedal, kind of sounded better than the original in-the-box reverb in the original version of the mix. You can let me know what you think in the comments below. You can check out the original mix through the link in the video description, as well as checking out all the other links there in the description that go to help support this channel. So I hope you enjoyed this mixing video. I'll be back with another one as soon as possible, and I hope you all have an excellent day, night, evening, weekend, weekday, hour, minute, second, nanosecond, whatever it is you're having. Have a good one, and thanks so much for watching.